Hi guys, welcome to the Hard Way Pod. I've got Liz Glazer, hilarious stand-up comic, on here. How you doing, Liz?
I'm doing well. How are you, Jess?
I'm surviving. I'm surviving in the in the quarantine. How have you been
Sure.
with all this? Everybody's okay that you know and all that?
Thankfully, yeah. I mean, not like I guess 100% everybody, because I think at this point, I can only speak for my own experience, but like I've found that, unfortunately, the degrees of separation between someone who's at all affected lessen as time goes on. And so thankfully, I've been okay, and everybody who's in, my very direct circle, thankfully, has been. But I do know of stuff, I
Yeah,
guess.
of people that are not doing so well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's crazy times, and just even like yesterday figuring out that they're extending our sort of lockdown situation until like the 15th of May, so it's starting to feel a little like I don't
yeah,
know, just this unprecedented feeling of
yeah,
normally we don't have to deal with this sort of stuff in this country where all of a sudden like everybody has to wear masks or we're getting
yeah,
fined in California, like I
right.
just made one like
Oh, did you?
hand sewn one because my friend sent me like this link with like little pictures where you can hand sew for materials in your house.
Oh,
So
interesting. Okay.
yeah, so I have one like I cut out of some like old clothes and some
Huh,
bathing suit string that I put on. So
that's cool. Yeah.
yeah, so all in all, just like different. So how are you doing with like, not getting to go out and do stand up and all that? Like what's your
Yeah,
life day to day now?
sure. I mean, I had like literally the day before everything went totally on lockdown, I had just like finished writing a part of something that set me up to have like a bunch more to do, but in such a way that I felt like I was in, kind of like at a dashboard of like, okay, I have these tasks. And sometimes, at least for me, with writing, like script writing or story writing, um, it's a struggle to get to that point where I really feel like I'm at the helm of a project. You know
Yeah,
what I
and
mean?
you're ready to just start like pushing it out and getting it done. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, like where I actually feel like I know where it's headed. Like obviously writing, happens in such a way that like when it's going well, there is a lot of surprise in it. And so I don't mean it that there's none of that, because of course there is and there continues to be as I go deeper into the project, but like um it happened at a time that was like, I don't know, singular for me in that way, where it was kind of like, okay, well, I guess I know what to do with my time to some degree. So hang on, I'm just gonna shut a door a little bit more. My
Okay.
cats go in and out. Uh,
Oh, kitties. Yeah, it's good to
yes,
have pets around this time for
I know
sure.
it's
Yeah.
a real blessing. But anyway, so I've been doing that, and then I take acting class, which is something that I've done pretty continuously during the past few years, like ever since I started doing kind of my own creative work,
Yeah.
and so that still happens. Like now it's on Zoom, obviously, and so
Yeah.
there's a lot of rehearsing and there's a lot of time that goes into that. So I guess, the main theme of my answer is yes, I miss stand up. For sure, I miss seeing people in the context of stand up and in general.
Right.
But I have had stuff to busy myself with
Yeah.
in a way that feels engaged and in flow during this time. What have you
Yeah.
been up to?
Yeah, I mean, like similarly, obviously my routine's thrown off because I don't have the show anymore, but I've been
Yeah.
doing the podcast continuously
Yeah.
through, I was using a different app at first, but now I'm using Zoom and I like it better, just like being able to be face to face too, even though I'm not posting the video parts, just because I'm trying to limit overworking when I'm in like this environment of like just being at home and always being on the computer, because I tend to do that. I tend to like overwork anyway, and I don't want to make it that I'm like, oh, now that you have this extra time because you don't have the show and you don't have to book people, it's still like,
Yeah.
it's just a lot of extra work to give myself. And I've just with my day job, tons of work with that. So really,
Oh, really?
yeah, because we work with a lot with city government clients, and so a lot of it is coming up with this sort of COVID-19 response playbook for how to keep people in business,
Yeah.
um, and, you know, keep things moving as much as it can while being safe during this time, because like a lot of
But
the
that's
people
a
are freaking
lot to
out. Yeah. And they don't know
right.
what to do. So,
Yeah.
and it's like a lot of us, like, you know, when I've worked remotely for a long time and now everybody is, so now we have like every other day we have these meetings,
Yeah.
and it's a process of like educating ourselves first in order to be able to help, you know, because it's not like everybody was an expert in this already that we could just like
Sure.
run off and be like, oh, we'll tell them exactly what to do because we know. So we had to spend a lot of time like figuring out, well, like, what is the best play, what should they be doing, how do we like convey it to them in a
Right.
way that's easy to understand, all that. So it's just been
Yeah.
a lot of that sort of stuff. And really, like, I'm lucky because I tended to spend a lot of time at home anyway. So for
Mhm.
me, you know, I'm not a person that goes out all the time. So, but
Right.
it has also been like, you know, not isolating so much that it's like starts to get really depressing, you know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess like many others, I've been doing the, daily walking thing. And honestly, I feel like I know this is not true, but it feels like I invented walking. Like like the level of surprise at the fact that it's just possible to do with the frequency and that it really does help
Yeah.
mentally, physically. I mean, it's like I have that feeling like, does everybody know about this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so I've really had that internal response to it. So I've been my brother recently moved to Los Angeles and he moved 1.1 miles away from my apartment, which is a distance that Los Angeles wise under non-quarantine rules, I never would have walked there.
Oh yeah, no way.
But, all it takes to make LA a walking city apparently is a global pandemic. And so
Yeah.
now I do that walk to and from. Yesterday I did it twice because it was National Siblings Day. But
Oh
mostly because I just needed to walk. And I do,
yeah.
we like talk like Romeo and Juliet, where I'm in the alley behind his apartment building and then he's on the sixth floor and
That's
whatever.
hilarious.
Yeah.
Have you
So
seen
we
a
do.
lot of people like uh talking to each other through balconies? I keep seeing videos like that. I think it's
Yeah, there
hilarious.
I haven't in his building, which is really the only one that I visit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've seen the videos online. I haven't seen it live though.
Yeah, no, I've been walking a lot more like with my dog. Like normally, you know, when I'm super busy with work and I'm like, all right, I have to get all this stuff done, so I better
Sure.
like get in and out, you know, just take him like, you know, on a short walk till he goes to the bathroom and bring him back. And now I'm like, what, you know, what's the rush? Take him around the block, you know, and it is very like meditative, you know, in a
Well,
way.
yes, I understand that completely and I agree and resonate. And it's just like one of the things, I mean, I've always been a nostalgic person in the moment. And what I mean by that is like when I was 4 years old, one of my earliest memories is I was sitting in my parents' apartment and I was like staring off into space, which was an activity that I did a lot of as a child. And my mother went by me and she was like, Elizabeth, what are you thinking about? And I was like, Mommy, one day today will be a long time ago. And I was 4 years old at the time. And she was like, I got to call my sister and show off about this.
That's
But
very wise for a 4-year-old to say.
perhaps. But what I mean by it is like, I've always been somebody who like in a moment in the present, and I don't mean this it's not always a good thing, but I'm often thinking about like, what will I miss about this experience? What will I be nostalgic for later? And so
Right.
in that vein, one of the things that I've been thinking about throughout quarantine is like things that I imagine that I'll miss in non-quarantine, and relatedly B, things that I hope I can take with me from quarantine into quarantine. And so like examples for me of stuff that, I had wanted to do before, like eat more from home as opposed to
Yeah.
getting every single thing from outside, which was a thing that I was like particularly prone to do before. And then also the walking thing has been a big one in that way. And there are others, but like, that's kind of like a growing list that I have that simultaneously, I mean, you know, it is out of the moment because it's specifically about a future moment. But
Right.
I guess like, I don't know, I think in the best case, it promotes a hopefulness about life after quarantine and like things that, you know, I don't know. I mean, with writing was something like that. I don't know. I would do a lot of stand up. And that was something that I was very, I guess, like good at doing a lot of. But then sitting down to actually do writing sessions was a little bit more for me of like a special occasion thing, or I would sort of do the
Right.
binging of like, you know, I'll write for like 6 hours if there's a deadline, but then I won't do the kind of 30 minutes to an hour daily kind of thing.
Right. Right.
And that's something that in quarantine I've been doing much more of. Um, because for stand up, it's not been like a cramming thing. For
Yeah.
me, you know, with stand up, it's like I always am just kind of like, okay, well, I'll do regular sets such that if there is a big opportunity that presents itself, I'm the best prepared that I could possibly be. Whereas for writing, for me, it was a little bit less of that.
Yeah.
And I guess similarly to some degree for acting as well. It was kind of like when I was doing a lot of stand up, I was like, oh, I don't know if I can like do all the stand up and do all the acting and do all the writing at once. And it's
Right.
not to say that now I am, but I think because there's so much less stand up, I've like shifted to focusing on other things that were always a part of my kind of dream and set of goals. But basically just allowing myself to pivot a little bit more in this moment that stand up is a little harder to access. Like I've done some Zoom things and like I have, you know, a Zoom situation that's like, you know, a longer set, like for a synagogue or whatever, but like, um, you know, it's much less frequent, the Zoom stuff,
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
than
but it
regular.
is a good like idea to sort of say like, "Oh man, like I'm capable of doing this and these are all the things I really do like about this that I'm learning
Yeah.
that I want to keep doing later." Like that's definitely a
Yeah.
good way to look at it.
Sure. I mean, trying to stay hopeful because I think that like, you know, that's the real thing that can be hard is in situations like this, at least for me, is like retaining a sense of hope
Yeah.
about how things could be. I don't know, you know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's tough and it's tough to not like feel discouraged to a way you're like what's the point?
Right.
Yeah.
Totally.
So anyway, yeah, we had like every time I've done one of these, it's like we can't not talk about this in the beginning at least because it's like
Yes, I understand.
this is what it is. But
Yeah.
let's get to some fun life lessons that you learned the hard way, and
Okay, great.
just tell me like whatever you want. I'll probably ask you questions throughout, and then I'll see what
Mhm.
that brings up for me because I'm sure just with some of the examples you gave me, I have plenty of mistakes that I
Yeah.
made along along those lines.
Yeah. So if I remember what I said to you, I mean, I know that that's something that I've talked about at your show, and then something that I'm, you know, more than willing to talk about here is like the real first time I ever did stand up. That was
Uh-huh.
definitely a lesson that I learned the hard way.
Yeah.
And then like I think the other thing that I said to you, and correct me if I'm missing something or if I didn't say this, but you know, just kind of like drugs stuff.
Hmm.
Um,
And
so
something with like you missed an opportunity for an audition because of like, some do it. Yeah.
oh yes,
Yeah.
that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think in both of those stories, and I can go into them individually and whatever, but like I would say that a kind of governing theme for both of them is allowing the kind of ego aspect of a goal to overrun the level of satisfaction and engagement that I had with a project. And
Yeah.
so like, I mean, the one example is so I wasn't always a stand-up comedian. Um, and this is something I know that you know, but I was a lawyer and then I was a law professor. And then after I had just gotten tenure, so like it's at kind of an apex of my career in some ways, was when I got the opportunity to do stand up for the first time. And the way that that came about was I had a crush on this improv instructor who I had met a couple of years prior. And basically I was like, she wasn't teaching classes anymore. And so I reached out to her on Facebook Messenger because we were connected on Facebook. And I was like, hey, are you available to do like one-on-one improv, which sounds like it might have some sort of innuendo, but I assure you I meant it. Like, I just like would have done anything to be around this woman. I thought
Right.
everything about her was like the coolest, bravest, like most amazing thing in the world. And I mean, not that I didn't have a regular crush on her, because I did, but I think at that time, like any crush that I could have had was like a talent crush, because I was so kind of unformed, I think, as a human, that I was still searching for somebody who like completed aspects of myself that I think weren't yet um, coate, you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
weren't like quite finished.
Yeah.
And so I was always, I think even unconsciously or subconsciously, I was like looking for that in a person who I would have romantic affection towards.
Yeah.
So
Danger
anyway,
zone. Yeah.
yeah, and I certainly like wouldn't have verbalized it that way at the time. I think I was just like, oh my God, she's amazing,
And you
or
probably
whatever.
wouldn't, you don't really know that,
Sure.
growing up and like learning like
Right.
relationships, like you think like this
Right.
is just what it is, you don't
Yeah.
realize
And
that
I
that's
think
like
a
gonna
100%.
backfire. Yeah.
Right. And also like a footnote on that point is like there's always going to be blind spots that anyone has as a human being. And so in this moment, a year or 10 years or 5 years later, I could listen back to this recording and be like, gosh, I didn't even realize all
Yeah.
the stuff that I was missing then. So, I think that there's like levels of awareness and of course for me, because I'm so in my head a lot of the time, is like I have to sort of recognize at some point that like, okay, you're just living with the biases that you have.
Yeah.
And yes, you can heighten your awareness as much as possible, but like maybe just like pull the brakes a little bit, or pump the brakes a little bit so that you can actually exist as opposed to just like thinking about the nature of your
Yeah.
existence.
Just
Because
over
that's,
analyzing
yeah,
everything so you don't
right.
actually
Like
get to
to the
enjoy
point that it doesn't
it.
even, doesn't even
Yeah.
make sense. But anyway, but so that was the kind of crush that I had on this improv instructor, and she was amazing. She was amazing as a performer, as a teacher, whatever. And she wasn't teaching classes anymore when I came back to the area that she was in, which was Chicago, to visit for another semester, because my main job was in New York, and I visited at a law school in Chicago, took her improv class. Then a couple years later, I visited again at another law school in Chicago, and I was like, hey, I would love to reconnect. Anyway, I was taking Adderall at the time. I was prescribed it, but
Uh-huh.
like the dose that I was prescribed and the dose that I would actually take, huge difference between those two numbers. And so
Oh.
like when I would get my prescription bottle, I would basically like take as much of it as I could handle.
Oh.
And
Because they
then
are
like,
already prescribed too much. Because I've been prescribed
yeah,
it as well, and I'm like, this is a lot. Like,
yeah,
I take
yeah,
like a quarter of what they prescribed, not four
right,
times as much. So you were
correct.
doing opposites. You were like, I'm just
Yeah,
gonna take extra.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh my
Exactly.
gosh.
And so it was just a bad idea all around, but that was kind of like what I was doing at the time. Um, because I think that like just as a side note on the Adderall thing, like for me, I've always been attracted as a person to kind of like how can I be doing more and how can I
Yeah.
get more insight and like take my experience of life to a level of a million or whatever. And I
Right.
think that like Adderall has this quality, especially for kind of a type A success results oriented person, is kind of like other drugs don't make you better at stuff that you've been trying to be good at and have been told since you were a kid that it's good to be good at. But
Right.
Adderall does that. And
Yeah.
so, I don't mean this to absolve myself of responsibility for this, but I'm just saying as a comment. And of course, like I don't have ADHD. And so obviously everybody responds to drugs in a different way, but
Right.
like the way that it affected my personality and my brain was I was just like, oh my God, I feel like my brain is like a Porsche engine being driven off the lot. Like
Yeah.
how I feel like I've unlocked levels in the video game of myself. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so,
And
so
also
anyway.
to
Mhm.
that point, like you're also still being prescribed to it. So you feel like, oh, like this is okay.
That's
And that you
true.
kind of like have a little bit, like, it's
Yeah,
not like you're doing meth. If you were doing straight up
right.
meth, even though it's like similar
Basically the
chemical,
same. Yeah,
like
yeah,
you'd feel bad about it doing it that way.
yeah.
But because
I
it's
think
because it's
that's
a
true.
prescription, you end up being like, oh, well, this is fine because they wouldn't let me do it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I think all of that's at play. But so anyway, so I was on a lot of it, and I
Mhm.
also I messaged this improv instructor, and we agreed to meet at this coffee shop to like discuss whatever sort of like tutoring she might or might not have been able to offer.
Mhm.
And I got there a little bit early, and I was flirting with the barista at the coffee place, and I did 18 shots of espresso in
Oh my
addition to
god.
um the half bottle or whatever of Adderall that I'd taken. So I was like very over caffeinated when we sat down to this meeting, to say the very least.
Oh my gosh.
And I think that like it might have been the case that the improv instructor interpreted that over caffeination as stage presence, because she then asked me, she was like, have you ever considered doing stand up? And I was like, no. And then she's like, would you do stand up on my show? And in my head, I was like, are you going to be at your show? I'll go anywhere you are. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
And so I said yes, and then it was amazing, is the way that the story normally goes. And all of that's true. And the joke that I have about it is the first time I ever did stand up felt like I was having a professional orgasm, which was basically like a regular orgasm, except that I was 100% sure that I was having it. And
Yeah.
that is true. It's a line that I said to my therapist. But what's also true is that there was this pre-set before the set that happened on a day in class when because I was still teaching at the time that all this happened, and there was this day that was like kind of like a snow day, but it wasn't a snow day yet. Like it was like, like I mean, I grew up in snow land, and
Yeah.
so like there were days that you would wake up and it's snowing, but it's not like cancelable yet, but they would cancel school at like 11 or 1 or whatever, so you would like go, but then you'd get to go home early. So it ended up being one of those days, but like, so it was super snowy, and it would later become a snow day. But I was teaching at like 10:30 in the morning or whatever, so it wasn't a snow day yet. But because it was snowy out and really snowy, there were only like 5 kids who came to school.
Oh, okay.
And they knew, because everybody in the world knew, that I was going to be doing stand up, because I told everybody who, like, even people I didn't know. I was just like, you must be interested in the fact that like the most amazing thing is happening to me. So anyway, so everybody knew this, and my students knew, and they were like, hey, can you like do in class, there were only a few of them there on this to be snow day. They were like, would you like do your stand up in class? And the thing is that like I didn't really have stand up. Like even when I would do stand up for the first time, like I was like really oblivious about what stand up even was, and it ended up like the first time was that professional orgasm, but not because it honestly, like even when I look back on it now, like it wasn't bad. I was just so clueless about what I was doing that it ended up being even a little bit good. Even now, if I go back to that recording, I don't actually have the first one, but I do have the second, which was a week later. And it's like, it's not good, but it's
Yeah.
also like, I feel better about that set than I do about some of my sets in the middle of my stand-up journey, which arguably I'm still in the middle, but
Yeah.
because it was so myself, because I had no idea what I was doing, that I couldn't not be myself.
Right. You
So,
weren't like judging yourself on like the structure and certain things,
right,
that like those like little mistakes that every
correct.
stand-up comic makes right in the beginning.
Yeah, yeah. And so I really like it wasn't good, but it was also like very pure. But anyway, this set that happened um before the set, like I didn't have, it's not like I was like writing jokes and then I said my jokes. I
Right.
would just kind of go, which is to some degree sometimes what I do now also. I just do it enough that it's like I'm not really just improvising, because I do
Right.
it so much that it's like there's sort of a context even if it is improvised. But at the time I had nothing, and I don't really remember exactly what happened on this like preset set in class, but I remember like at some point I was I did a Tom Cruise impression. At some point, I was like live typing out a PowerPoint presentation because I was like convinced that the typing of the presentation live in the moment was a performance. Um, I mean, it was just like wild. And
It's like
then
all over the place, kind of.
totally all over
Yeah.
the place, like basically like Tom Cruise jumping on the couch, you know?
Oh my God.
Um, and then later that day, I got this phone call from the associate dean at this school that I was visiting at. And he was like, Liz, are you okay? And I remember this phone call because I was like, yes, I feel amazing. And he was like, okay, well, you're not in trouble, but, which is like something that people say only when you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Um, but some of your students came by and they, and frankly, I are concerned about whether you're okay. And
Oh,
that was what like started a process where I had like a 2-hour consultation with 4 different psychiatrists with like this very long kind of battery of questions, basically like trying to determine whether I was like totally insane or
oh
not.
my God.
And then I had another long meeting with like the dean and the associate dean and some other, there's a lot of deans
Yeah.
at schools. And anyway, it turned out all to be okay because I think that like, while I did dig this hole for myself, I think it was a function of being so overly medicated and also kind of like what I said at the beginning of this story was kind of letting the ego of the situation overrun the the doing of it, where I was like, oh my God, this humongous thing is happening in my life. I've been called by Hollywood. I'm a celebrity and I have to answer.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, obviously things don't happen that way, but I guess kind of didn't know, you know, and I don't mean it to say like I'm not responsible for it. Like it was obviously a series of dumb and dumber decisions, but like that kind of it was just too much. It
So
was too much
so
for me at
so
the time.
they were so when the dean's calling you, they're like, "Why the hell did
Yeah.
you do stand up in class?"
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah,
Yeah,
basically.
because
And
but like wasn't there a level of, or maybe you don't remember, like just, "Hey students, we're about to have a snow day here." And
yeah.
you'd been telling them, like they weren't they like asking you to do it? They're like, "Come on, do the,
Yeah.
yeah." So
Yeah.
basically like you weren't just like, "Okay, nobody wants this, but I'm doing it at you anyway." Like
Well,
people
that's
definitely.
for sure, that's true. But I think, I mean, thankfully in moments like this, it's a really good question that you ask. But because it allows me to sort of like remember like and say this, I think somewhat generalizable statement about myself, which I think is true, is that like I can sometimes do some really dumb shit, but then there's also like it's almost like I don't know, I guess everybody is composed of multiple selves, but I think some of mine are a part of me that sometimes goes completely wacky in some direction. And sometimes it's drug induced, which is a reason that I don't do drugs.
Right.
Because I think that like everybody's body responds differently. And I think mine responds in this way where it's like, and then I went this whole crazy direction, you
Oh
know?
yeah.
And I do think that like, you know, some of these types of stories in my life do amount to like, and I was on insert,
Yeah. So
even
now
if it's
you don't wouldn't
prescribed.
even know if you would have done that if you weren't on
Correct.
it at this point.
Yeah,
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 exactly.
exactly. And so there is that aspect of it, but there's also just like I guess I am very excitable is another like related thing because I think part of the reason that I've ever done drugs is because I'm just like I want to take my life to this level of excitement, and if I could promote that excitement then why not? And
Right.
now, you know, I've had enough experiences to understand why not. But like so I think there's that piece of it, but then also in some of those moments I've still been me, and I'm still able to like recognize in an undefensive way when someone's asking me the question of like why did you do this, rather than be like, well, here are all the reasons that I was correct in my decision. I've been able to be like, you know what, you actually are right,
Yeah.
person who's posing this question to me. And I guess like because I've been able to handle stuff on the back end that way, and I don't think I was conscious of it as a pattern except for, you know, looking backward at it, but I think because of that I've been able to like show myself to be a reasonable person at base, even when I've had missteps like this. And so in that specific case, when I was like ultimately called for all these meetings that had serious consequences,
Yeah.
I had already like sort of prepped, like between me and my students, like I was like, I was wrong. In order to like guard against the possibility that I would do such a thing again, let me redo the syllabus from now until the end of the semester and say exactly what we're covering every single time, so that I'm able to show my students that, and also show the various deans that, so that I can be like, yeah, I'm not defending what I did. It was totally wrong. And I'm really sorry. And also I can understand that you're uncomfortable allowing me to like continue to teach these people. And so
Right.
I get it. And here's what I've done to kind of like show you, and also guard for myself against the possibility of remaking that kind of mistake. And so I
Right.
did that, and, was able to basically like come back down to earth.
Yeah. Oh my
Um,
gosh, it's so funny because I've heard you talk about this, and like
mhm.
maybe it's because of, knowing you, and like, just thinking about just how funny it sounded and everything. But like when you put it like that, and you put like the dean, like even the Adderall aside, I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, I guess it is kind of inappropriate to test a stand-up set on your
Yeah.
students in a law
Yeah.
school, like when they're supposed to be learning like a thing, and I
Right.
don't know how long it was or whatever, but I'm like, it didn't even occur to me before that that was a bad thing. I thought it's like,
Oh, yeah.
oh yeah, fun. This is
Right.
a nice little break for them when all they're doing is like learning, like, very,
Yeah.
very detailed law-based stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, right. And it's like, I don't know that it was some enormous deal really,
Yeah.
because like even if it is the case that a lot of school is substantive, like it's not the case that 100% of it is substantive. And I think that I tend to, I don't know, I was pretty like, I mean, I certainly infused humor into my classes, but I
Right.
think that like that was definitely an exceptional day for me. And so, because it was so out of the norm for me, I think was part of the reason that it had the attention on it. And
Right.
so I think they were like that, coupled with my kind of very willingness to be like, listen, I was wrong, helped to
Yeah.
kind of like
And
make it to
and
not be a
and
thing.
your ability to be like, here, let me show you that my brain is working properly. I've fixed
Yeah.
it like on paper for you, so you
Yeah.
can see that I can structure it back to making you feel
Right.
comfortable, sort of thing.
Right. Here are the rails. I can
Right.
see them and I can like get back
Right.
on them. And yeah, and I guess like the other example, there are aspects of it that are the same, but it doesn't have like sort of a neat ending. But it was basically, I mean, the ways in which it's similar. So I was in an acting class in New York that was like, I mean, a lot of acting classes are like, offhandedly called cults. And I mean that in the best way. Like it was just like such fun drama with cool people. And like, I think about that acting class like a lot. Just because, I mean, the teacher was like very, I don't know, like he said a lot of stuff that like probably I think of more than any other teacher of anything that I've ever learned. Um, and it was just like you learned about acting, but it was more like this class just about like learning about how to handle your life. And this, I don't know, there's like a lot of like spiritual aspects to it, and everybody in class was like super interesting, and everything, the class itself felt like drugs.
Hmm.
That, yeah, that's what I mean. Like in the same way that I remember like going to like a cool party in high school, and like somehow you got in and you're like, "Oh my god." Like euphoria,
Yeah.
just this
Yeah.
like, "Oh my god, like how is it that I'm allowed in my real life to experience this? This is the most fun I've ever had."
Right.
And I guess like it was like that because, I mean, I was in the class for 3 years, and when I first started being in it, I was just so schleppy, and everybody in there was like so beautiful and they look like TV people. And I, some of them were and stuff, but it was just like
Yeah.
this glamour. Like everything that I ever imagined Hollywood in my wildest dreams to be was this class, and the music was loud, and we would just like, people were lip syncing on stage, and it was very, I don't know, like
It's
Drag
like a
Race,
TV
Drag
show of a class, but it was the actual
yeah.
class. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. That's what it felt like. And so, there was a part of like, I think a lot of like the stories that I think of that are formative in my life are like me being around people that I think are so cool, and me thinking that I am such a nerd, and kind of being right about that, but then figuring out like, how can I be cool? Like, what are the elements of cool in this new setting that
Right.
I can somehow figure out and hack for myself? And for me, some of that, like becoming a law professor was in many ways that. And like, I have stories about like, getting on student government in high school after being really shy at the beginning. And like, there's, a lot of
Yeah.
stories that I feel like fall into this pattern of kind of triumph over, kind of being an underdog and stuff like
Right.
that. But I guess like in this setting, I was like, well, this is going to be a tough one, because I know how to like open a book and get better at stuff, but I don't know how to like what book do you study to be like a glamorous famous person or
Yeah.
seem like one? And then you got to be like good at acting, and you have to like figure out how to make these cool people laugh, and figure out how to be yourself just like you are in front of like your brother and your parents and your best friends, but like in front of these super intimidating people. And like, to me, that was like just the biggest goal.
Yeah.
And I was in the class at this point for maybe like 2-ish years, and like still just thought everyone and everything about it was the coolest thing in the world. And we would have these film festivals, and they were like film festivals where you had to shoot everything on your iPhone, which was a really inspired move, because it was when, that movie, I actually haven't seen it. I should. I'm in quarantine. I can see it. But the movie's called Tangerine. And
Yes.
yeah, you've seen it?
I haven't seen it, but I know what you're talking about. And they shot that
Right.
on an iPhone, no?
Totally on an iPhone. And
Yeah.
it's apparently like this amazing, like very like pro-trans rights, like story and
Yeah.
cast and whatever. And it's like this beautiful movie, apparently. And it's all shot on an iPhone. And the teacher of this class was like really inspired by that. And he was like, we're just doing iPhones. Everybody can do iPhone movies. And so we're going to have a film festival of iPhone movies. And so you're all going to be split up into groups, and you're going to do the iPhone movies. And anyway, so there was this one film festival that I did my iPhone movie with my group. And I guess my performance got some attention by some of the people, because we had like a few of these festivals, and, I guess like quote unquote real people would come. And so there were like some agents and managers and like people who were connected to whatever. And so I was in a thing, and I like won an actor award for like whatever in one of the iPhone movies.
Awesome.
And I was like excited about that, because like that was me kind of, as a personal victory, like being cool among cool kids.
Yeah. I mean, winning an award for your performance,
Yeah,
that's always cool,
sure.
I think. Yeah.
Totally. Especially in this environment where I was
Yeah.
like, oh my God, I'm like the big nerd who's like a lawyer, and how am I ever going to like, just be one of them.
Right.
And then I guess I was for like an instant. And I remember this like film producer who was like connected to something, was like, hey, would you maybe be able to read for this particular part? We think that Leah Delaria is gonna play it, but we'd love for you to read for it. Would you be available? And in my head, I'm like,
Oh, hell
I
yeah.
think so.
Yeah.
Like, let me check my schedule. But then what happened was I was like, oh my God. Like, I think I allowed the thought of like, this is so cool. Similar to like the first stand-up performance, which is like, yeah, it's great. And like, all it requires is for you to just have your shit in order and like show up to the stage and do your thing,
Yeah.
And similarly, all that I would have needed to do this is just like continue being and doing the things that I was doing and show up for the audition
Right, because
whenever.
you already did what you
Yeah,
needed to do to get that,
totally,
so you shouldn't have
totally.
had to go extra. Yeah.
But instead, I spent the evening, like it was like the kind of night where like I was good friends with a lot of people in my acting class. And this was
Right.
also pre-coronavirus by many years. So I would just like be like if like let's say I passed by you in the bar that like the after party was, I would just take your beer, drink some of it, give it back to you, and
Yeah.
do the same for like every single person in class. And I just remember like smoking everybody's cigarettes, smoking everybody's weed, like that type of night where I was just like, if there is a substance, I will have some.
Yeah.
And I
Were
just
you in like
remember,
celebration mode too? Because you just had that,
yeah,
and you're like, oh man,
100%.
time to party and enjoy it. Yeah.
Right, right. And all the same like producers and people who were like applauding whatever I had done were still at the party. And I just remember at some point I was like standing on top of a car that was parked on the street. And
Ugh.
like anyway, suffice it to say, the audition never happened. Nothing
Ugh.
ever came of any of that. And not to say that I would have been like right for the part or ready for it or anything.
Right.
But it didn't happen. And it was also like a function, I think, of me being like, oh my God, I can't believe that anything is like this is happening. And what am
Yeah.
I going to do except for like, do something that feels nuts?
Yeah. So yeah, just like kind of took that away for yourself by how you acted after that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah.
That's
And
such a bummer, but such a lesson that I feel like
yeah, I mean,
everybody
of
has
course.
to.
Right. And it's like in both those stories, like I don't look back on any of that and think like, oh, well, I shouldn't have well, I guess maybe a little bit. Like, insofar as it affected like my students, I feel, like I shouldn't have done that. And insofar as it like broke a rule, I feel that way. And I guess with the acting thing, yeah, like I don't smoke anything or drink anything these days. Although I have been taking a nightly shot of NyQuil, which
Oh.
like I just feel like I need to say because I identify as a sober person, but I'm not like like AA was not how I got sober and
Mhm.
whatever. So I don't know. I just feel like I have to say that like because I have been doing I don't know how you've been sleeping in quarantine,
No,
but
I've been smoking weed to go to
oh
sleep.
yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
interesting.
But like
Yeah,
that's the thing is like I almost look at it as I mean, and not that I like never smoked weed before, but I don't really very much because I don't smoke during the day because I won't get shit done. But I used to like
yeah,
when I was younger, I smoked like all day every day. I don't know
right.
how the hell I did that, but I also like have to when I do smoke, I have to smoke like indica. Like I'm not smoking like the
Okay,
thinky weed because then I'll
yeah,
start getting all crazy and be like,
yeah,
all right, quit your life. You're
yeah,
terrible at everything. Just
yeah.
everything is the worst, So, but
Mhm.
it's definitely something that I've picked up a lot more in quarantine. And I'm like, there's like quarantine rules and then there's like
Yeah,
regular rules,
I
And
hear you. Yeah, I mean, I don't know 100% how I feel about it, especially because like so many of my stories that I feel like I've learned from have been like, and maybe it would have been different if I hadn't had this or that substance.
right.
And so, it's an open question. I mean, really what I've been doing is like I have like the prescribed whatever amount of NyQuil or Benadryl and then like I do that at around like 10, sometimes a little bit earlier, but like I try to go to bed around like 10 or 11 and then rather than like staying up until 2 and sometimes 4 in the morning, which was happening, which was why I started this,
Yeah.
I don't do that. And I kind of like go to bed at a regular time. So I don't know. I mean, I just say it to say,
I think as long as you're, as long as you're not drinking the whole bottle of NyQuil,
oh, yeah, yeah,
you're doing okay. But yeah, it is one of those things that you do have to watch because it's like
yeah,
you don't want to sustain this like pattern for too
right,
long to where it's like
yeah,
this is something now that you need. But I get that because I'm up to like 2-ish anyway
yeah,
because it's just tough. It's always been kind of tough for me to sleep, and now is no different. It's worse for sure. So
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So, but anyway, so like, with those stories, I don't think they're 100% due to drugs, but I think it's kind of close.
Yeah, but there's also, do you think there's also like a sabotaging aspect to it where you're sort
Yeah,
of like, you're so uncomfortable like that you're like, well, now I'm going to get too fucked up and it's going to be about
yeah.
that, you know?
I think that's very true. And actually part of the reason that the acting class that I was talking about earlier was as transformative and like pivotal for me is like a lot of that stuff was like what the teacher talked about in a very productive way of like sure you can like become good at acting and whatever to like make it, but then like what are you going to do once you get there? And so he would talk a lot about like Heath Ledger,
Mm,
and just like examples of people, Amy Winehouse, that like yeah they get to a point where they're like at this apex creatively, but they don't know how to handle it. And so a lot of it was almost a class on like how to be famous, which is a little cart before the horse, which is like part of what's
yeah.
the sort of satirical version of the class is kind of like you're teaching mostly people who are just wondering what to do when they get into an audition room how to be famous. And
Yeah.
there's something funny about that, but there's also something that's like really smart about that because he's like, I'm not worried about any of you having a career. I'm worried about once you get yours, are you going to sabotage it?
Right.
And
Which is
so,
which
yeah,
is
so
also like the whole thing of like there's a lot of rejection still that you have
yeah.
to take, you know, even if you're famous, like people are still
Oh, yeah.
hating on you and telling you to
Right.
go kill yourself on the internet all day, like
Yes.
things like that,
Yeah.
you
He would
know.
talk a lot about that too. That's, yeah, as you're saying that, that's like, because there are people through the class and in the class community that had kind of like, really shot out into stardom somewhat suddenly. And, it was like a question of like, how are they handling the negative comments on Twitter and like I don't know. I mean, he would talk a lot about the four agreements. I don't know if that's something that you are familiar with. It's this
Mm-mm.
book by Don Miguel Ruiz. It's like an old book, but it's something that like a lot of spiritual self-helpy people talk about. And the four agreements basically, if I can get them right, are do your personal best, don't take things personally. Um, now I'm forgetting the other two, which is annoying. I'm just gonna wait. I just want to Google
Let's
very briefly.
look it up.
Yes. What are the four? Okay. Be impeccable with your word and don't make assumptions. So impeccable with your word. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions and always do your personal best. And so he would talk a lot about that, and especially about like the don't take things personally and don't assume,
Yeah.
because like a lot of like the way that rejection hits and the way that like YouTube and Twitter hate comments hit is about that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, basically like reframing what it is that your job is like as a creative person who may be in the public eye, so that you're not concerned and you don't like kind of define yourself on the basis of what others think of you
Right.
in any moment. It's an totally important lesson,
Yeah.
and I think it was like being in that class for the time that I was, really drilled those kinds of concepts. And now, I mean, I take kind of more regular acting class, which is like more about how do you say lines as a character under imaginary circumstances,
Right.
um, and less about like what do you say in your Oscar speech. Um,
Yeah.
but I think that like sometimes when I'm in classes now with people who, didn't have that class, it's kind of like some of the sort of baseline things, like the way that they're like, oh my God, but I like need an agent. And it's kind of like, don't worry.
Yeah.
Like, just kind of get your shit in order. And like, it is about the vibration. And I don't know. I don't think, I know for sure that when I was like practicing law and teaching law, I would never have thought that stuff like that matters.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that taking his class really instilled those concepts. His name is Brad Calcaterra. I've only said wonderful things about him here, so
Yeah.
I feel like it makes sense to say his
Yeah,
name.
totally.
But
But yeah,
he,
there is that level too, I think, of like when people are like rushing to get out there and put themselves out there. And like I've not been like that, and maybe to a fault, but to where I'm like, I don't want to put myself out there before I think I'm ready and looking
sure,
like I'm as proud of what I'm doing as I can be. And not to say that you'll ever be finished,
right.
but like almost like getting a special way too early and completely bombing it and
Yeah.
ruining your career because all you cared about was putting yourself out there and in front of people. And like
Well, I
there,
think that that's the piece, what you said just there at the end, Jess, like, and I think that's really the reason for learning the lessons the hard way that I brought up in this episode is if the reason for pushing one's work out there is that ego piece of like, I
yeah,
just got to have my name in big lights, which like I relate to that kind of goal more than anybody. I'm disgusting in that way, right? But I think that as I've learned more lessons the hard way, like I've been able to, at least in the moments that I'm like chasing that sort of glory, that I'm able to recognize it at least a little bit more and be like, okay, like just easy,
yeah,
like just keep going, as opposed to like if it feels like a big push to something, like you're saying about,
yeah,
an example of having a special tour. There was this book that one time my mother and I listened to on a drive from New Jersey to Chicago. That's not important to the story, but it just is fun for me to remember. My mom and I love to take like a long drive together. But we were listening to this book. It's called Born to Run, and it's by this guy who's like a runner, Chris Osborne, I think his name is. And neither my mother nor I are runners, even in quarantine. I'm just like walking, I
yeah,
can do. Running, no way. But um, I remember there was this quote in the book that was maybe attributed to somebody else in the book, but to my mind, it's this guy, Chris Osborne, who said it, which was, if it feels like work, you're working too hard. And this was about running, which to me, I'm like, therefore, I will never run
yeah.
because it 100% of the time feels like work.
Yes.
But I like that quote because, like, and for me, I've never really like except for like first year of law school where I didn't study at all. I just like closed the door to my dorm room and would lip sync B-sides of Rick Astley like in front of the mirror. But for the most part, like working too hard has never been a problem for me. Like that's kind of, I need to kind of curb that more. But I think that like that idea that like if it feels like a push, then there might be something to like kind of back away from, is an instinct that it took me a long time to get to, you know? And
Yeah.
I think specifically when it's like an ego-based reason for wanting to push something out, especially if it feels like a push and feels like work, that's when over time I've been able to be like, yeah, maybe I'll kind of retreat slightly,
Yeah.
in this moment.
Oh. Yeah, I just thinking about like relating to just self-sabotage stuff. I can
Yeah,
completely relate to that. And as I think about and hear these stories, it's like it makes me think that I wasn't doing anything cool enough up until like I was 25 to really sabotage anything
sure.
career wise,
Right.
because I never really had any direction. But I definitely can relate to the because like I was gonna go to law school
Yeah.
is what I thought I would do, but that was mostly because it was like with my family, it's like you become a lawyer or you become a thing. Like
Yeah.
comedy and entertainment is never anything you do. That's just a
Right.
hobby. But like even just thinking about times when like you have a situation that's going really well and then being the one that like gets too excited that you have to take it to that next level and fucking it all up.
Yeah.
And it's like I can think about this one time as I had like we in high school I had like a lot of friends like that, I had different groups of people, and like my house was like a house where we'd go hang out and party at. And
Yeah.
South Florida, whatever, we're drinking way too early, too
Yeah.
young. And I just remember this one time like having a bunch of friends over, and it was Christmas time. And
Okay.
it was like such a nice time that like my friends are helping my mom decorate the tree. Like she's
Yeah.
having a blast. Like everybody's like drinking a little, you know, and then I decide that I'm going to snort a bunch of Xanax too
Sure.
for some
Sure.
reason. I'm like, this is already a great party. I'm having
Right.
fun.
Right.
Everybody's allowed. We're all drinking. We're having a great time. And I like retreat to my room to be
Yeah.
just a total fuck up. And I
Yeah.
go in there and do that. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do that. Now I'm like extra fucked up. So I can go back out there and enjoy this like times
Right.
10,000, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in that time, I don't know why or what, but I remember like getting the hiccups in my
Okay.
room and like thinking, you know what you should do is you should like swallow upside down
Oh
to
my
get
God.
rid of these hiccups, you know? So I like take a sip of beer or whatever the fuck I'm drinking that's alcohol, and I'm like
Yeah.
17, so I shouldn't. And of course, I like tip over because I'm all fucked up, and I end up like hitting my face on this little coffee table that I had in my room.
Yeah.
And I'm fine. Like I'm just like, but clearly now I look really fucked up because like I've got the hiccups. I'm all, I'm all fucked up, and I've hit my face, so I'm all like red and like puffy now. And so I
Yeah.
remember going back out, and I was
Uh-huh.
probably gone for like 10 minutes. Going
Uh-huh.
back out, and my mom seeing me and being like, "Whoa." Like,
Yeah.
what the fuck are you on? Like, she thought I was on Quaaludes or something. She's like,
Ah!
are you on Quaaludes? And I'm like, they don't even make those. I'm like
Right.
being such a little shit,
Yeah.
just totally ruin it. So, of course, like now, I think my mom didn't realize everybody was drinking because we had like hidden beer and we were drinking out of cups. Like, so she just thought everybody's like having a good time. But then, and everybody's being normal about it. They're
Right.
like drinking, but they're not getting too fucked up, so it's smooth. I
Yeah.
ruin it by getting way fucked
Ah!
up and outing everybody for
Yeah.
having. And she's like seeing my drink. She's like, "What is this?" And then she starts to realize, ruin the whole party. Everybody gets kicked out of the house. Just
Sure.
completely destroyed.
Right.
Like what was such a great time. Like just like everybody's having a blast. We're decorating the tree, but Jesse had to go
Yeah.
be a fucking psycho and
I mean,
ruin.
yeah. I relate to that because it's kind of like recognizing. I mean, the tough thing, at least for me, is that it arises as a result of a zest for the experience that one is having.
Yeah.
But then there's this like dosage element, which is kind of like, and the perfect dose of that experience is exactly before you snort the
Yeah,
Xanax,
yeah. I would have been fine. Everything would have been great, but
Right.
like I had to like take it up a notch to the other level.
Yeah.
And the other thing, like when you were talking about your 18 shots of espresso,
Yes.
bananas, especially just having already being on Adderall, but like I think about this one time when I was like driving and I could have just had a regular amount of caffeine like a normal person, but no, I had to
Yeah.
like take it up a notch. And I remember like I was driving from South Florida to Orlando. So it was like a 3-hour drive. And then at that point, my boyfriend at the time lived in Mississippi and he was like visiting family. So he was like,
Uh-huh.
"Oh, come visit me." So I decide like, and it was already late when I was leaving. So I think I was getting there like 8 p.m. And I'm like, yeah, sure. I'm going to drive
Right.
this extra 10 hours for no
Sure.
fucking reason. So I'm like, you need a lot of caffeine. So I went to the gas station and I got those like trucker pill things.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And I got a 16-ounce Red Bull.
Oh geez. Okay.
And I took two of because I didn't read the instructions like a dumbass. I just took two because I'm like, you take two of stuff,
Right.
So I took I
Of
took two, I
stuff.
took two of those, and
Uh-huh.
then I drank the Red Bull, and it was probably about like an hour or so before I started like hands tingling, face tingling, like panic attack, like coming on level stuff, and I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
god, I'm gonna
Yeah.
die, and I had to keep like pulling over and pulling
Sure.
over because like I was like shaking and like just felt my face going numb and I was like, oh god, but in my head I'm not even connecting the two and being like, no, you're an idiot and
Ah,
you had too much caffeine.
why could this be?
Yeah. Like, why am I freaking out? And
Right.
then eventually like, and this is like way before iPhones, and like this is when you had to like map quest things beforehand and print it out, so
Yeah.
because I'm in college, and I like remember being like, I wouldn't even know how to get to a hospital. But at this point, I'm having a panic attack and I'm thinking I'm going to die. So I'm like, I need to
Yeah.
get to a hospital. So what I end up doing instead is
Yeah.
I see a cop has pulled somebody else over on the
Okay.
side of the road. So I like screech behind the cop and
Uh-huh.
I like pull the cop over basically. And I'm like, help
Ha!
me. I'm dying. Oh my God. And it's like, and like, just like speaking at 10,000 miles a minute, you know, just like they're coming up. They're like, what do you want? I'm like, I don't know these bills, blah, 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 you know, and it just like,
License and registration.
and I'm like, ah, you know, so I like give them like the thing that I took. And I'm like, I just took some of these. And they're like, oh my God. They're like, you're only
Wow.
supposed to take one of these every 15 hours, you know? And so they get like the fucking ambulance thing and they're like testing my heart rate. And they're like, yeah, your heart rate's pretty high, but they're like, you just had way too much caffeine. You're an idiot. So like I caused this whole
Yeah.
scene like a dumbass.
Yeah.
And then they're like, okay, go to Waffle House,
Yep.
soak
Sure.
it up, you know? So
Secure for everything. Yeah.
but then again, like an idiot, my dumb ass is like, oh, I don't want Waffle House. I'm going to hold out for McDonald's, right? So I hold out till a couple more exits
Uh-huh.
and end up going to McDonald's and it's closed. So I'm like, oh no. And at this point, like it's taken a turn from shaking to like, oh no, I really have to go to the bathroom.
Oh,
So as I get to this McDonald's, I end up shitting my pants
yep.
in the car and I'm like, oh geez. And then I have to throw my pants away in this McDonald's trash can and then
Sure.
take my shitty ass the rest of the way, all the way to my boyfriend's house. And I'm like, look at all these stupid things that you did in a row that now
Wow.
you're showing up at his house smelling like shit. Like this is fucked
Yeah.
up. Yeah.
Wow. That's a great
Oh
story.
my God. Too much caffeine though. Like I
Yeah.
can't believe that it looked positive when you were not only on so much Adderall, but then had that many shots of espresso.
Interesting. Well, it could have been because it was before that hour mark that you mentioned. You know?
Oh.
And then there was something you said earlier that I just wanted to clarify because you were like, I didn't do anything cool before like 25. I just want to say that all of the examples that I've given on this podcast of those like major fuck ups were when I was older than 33.
Oh
So
shit.
either 33 or above.
Yeah,
So like
that's true.
it is definitely possible to fuck up as an older person. And for me, I feel like I fucked up way more then. Not that I didn't as a kid, but I think that like as a kid, a lot of my kid years were spent like being impressive for my parents. And then I made up for it later in life and was like, oh, now is when I'm going to really do a number on my life.
Now I'm gonna really like test these
Yeah,
waters and fuck shit up.
exactly. Yeah.
Oh man. Well, we need the lessons though, because now
Yes, you're so right. Yeah, and my desire kind of in life is just to be on the lookout for those lessons and hopefully to have like learned them such that I needn't repeat them over and over to learn them. And for me, writing about them is like a big aspect to like, okay, I feel like I've learned that lesson. And
right.
in the next instance, I don't have to do at least the things that I already did and presumably learned from in order to relearn those lessons. You know what I mean?
Right. And I think
Yeah.
there's just like just having that self-awareness too is the most important to be able to look back and say
Yeah.
like, okay, this wasn't the worst. This could have been better like this. It sucks when you don't, I hate that feeling of
Right.
thinking like I will never know if I would have done this thing if it weren't for that thing. Like my one
Yeah.
of my least favorite things is like getting too drunk and then the next
Yeah.
day people being like, you were so fun, and I don't really remember
Yeah.
things. I'm like, well, that's not cool to me because I'm like, oh, maybe I was fun, but like I was probably a drunk asshole, which
Sure.
I don't end up being a mean drunk, but
Right.
it's like
Right.
if you don't really remember and everybody's like got these like fun laughing with you stories, I'm still like, oh no, that makes me very uncomfortable.
Sure.
Because I'm like, would I have acted like that if not
Yeah.
for
That makes sense. Yeah. And I can appreciate that. I guess like if there is, I mean, I imagine I'll have tons of lessons that I've yet to learn. I think one, now that we are talking about awareness, I feel like it comes back to what we said earlier in the conversation that it's kind of like, I feel like a lot of the lessons that I've learned thus far are about heightening awareness. And I think the lessons I've yet to master, are about when to kind of let go on some of that awareness and just like allow an experience to sort of saturate a moment for me, which is something that I'm trying to get better at.
Yeah. And also like to your, your point earlier too about not over analyzing so much that you're not
Correct.
actually living like one of
Yeah.
the things like I've started picking up again, which I used to do a lot. I used to meditate a lot more just because like my,
Yeah.
the thoughts spin so much you can't sleep. I have to like write it down to get it out of my brain sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just like trying to let go of like just like judging yourself for stupid little shit that doesn't really matter, like over like the 4 points you made with don't assume, like you
Yeah.
have these assumptions that everybody's saying this or people are thinking this and like this thing that you did this, and it's like no, like
Yeah. You don't know.
calm down. Yeah,
Right.
just relax.
Yeah. Yeah. Meditation has been a big thing for me. I do TM. That's something that I started in spring of 2018 was when
what's
I
what's that?
transcendental meditation.
Oh,
It's just a way of whatever, obviously there's a lot of different kinds of meditation. So that's been helpful for me. And then now somebody in my acting class now like was doing this like 21-day abundance meditation. It's kind of like, I don't know, I signed up for it. It was free. I just get like a thing on WhatsApp and then, kind of go through these motions that are allegedly supposed to bring more abundance.
right.
So, anything like that, I'll pretty much do.
Yeah. You're
If
like
it's
I'll
like,
test it out. Yeah.
yeah, like it's like, okay, great. And I guess like in some ways I have the same attitude towards those things as I used to have towards any drug that I imagined might heighten a moment for me. And I was like, yeah, totally, give it to me. And similarly, I feel like now that I don't have that available to me except for NyQuil, I will allow myself to like, it's like, yeah, sign up for the abundance meditation, go to the sound bath,
Oh,
do
I love a good sound bath, dude.
right? It's so
Yeah.
fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's basically like an expensive nap.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. With
uh,
lots of cool vibrations, except for I
naps
have been to
are
some where
very
people ruin
underpriced.
people ruin
Right,
them, and I'm like,
right.
why is this guy like talking about like I
Yeah.
hate like the really corny cheesy, when it's like a 25-year-old that's like
Oh
speaking
yeah.
with this wisdom that like came clearly out of a book, and it's like, can you just
Right.
be be
Right.
human? Like,
Sure, sure.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I've had some of those experiences. I think I know what you mean. But
Yeah.
um yeah, but like any of that stuff, I feel like I've kind of substituted for what I used to, do that. I don't think I'm, you can't overdose on sound
No,
baths, you know.
you can't. Let's not
So
figure out a way to do that for
right.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think that's definitely the healthier option.
Yeah. Yeah. Trying.
Oh, well, this is such a good conversation. I feel
Oh, it
like we
was
learned a
so
lot
wonderful.
here, and
Yes, the
it's
same.
just so funny to me because I know that I've heard the stand up thing, and it just never occurred to me that that would be a
Ha!
problem
Oh,
until like
great.
I spoke to multiple psychiatrists, and I'm like, whoa,
Yeah.
okay, that's fair, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm
Yeah.
glad that it worked out. And
Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks so much for taking the time. And
Of
yeah, I'm doing these in
course.
real time, so it'll come out on Tuesday.
Yes.
And is there
Oh,
anything that
fun.
you'd like to promote before we sign off here?
I've been doing these hashtag minute memoirs, also hashtag minute memoirs, spelled the same way. But I post them on Instagram and like Vimeo and YouTube too, but Instagram primarily. And it's basically just very short stories that are video reenactments from my life
Oh
of,
yeah, I've seen those.
you
They're
know,
hilarious. Especially
thank
it's
you.
like the very quick speed that you tell them, I still
Yeah,
think like adds to it.
thank you.
Yeah, I really like that a lot. And
Thanks.
I'll link to all this stuff in the show notes and all that
Amazing.
so that
Thank you
people can
so
find
much,
it.
Jess. It's always a pleasure to talk to
Yeah,
you.
and hopefully I'll see you
Yeah.
soon out in the
Yes.
world.
I
All
also
right.
hope that. I hope you stay well.
I'm trying.
Yeah, same. All right.
All right,
Bye.
bye.